If we could have all of you take your seats. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. Ki mimini balemot. Lechein samach libi v'yagel kivoldi. Af besari yishkon levetach. Ki lo ta'azov nafshi lish'ol. Lo titein chasidcha lirot shachat. Todiein yorech hayim. Sovasmachot et panecha. Ni'imot bimincha netzach. These words from the 16th Psalm. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side, I will not be moved. Therefore my heart exults and my soul rejoices. My being is secure. For you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful ones see destruction. You show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. We gather here today to honor the memory of Jack Dashash, Yaakov ben Moshe Halevi, Zichrono Livracha, of blessed memory. We come together because we have a sacred and holy task, the task of accompanying Jack's soul as it goes me'olam hazeh le'olam haba, from this world to the world to come. We do so as we say words of nechama, words of comfort, like these words from the 16th Psalm, and we'll recite some others as well. We'll say words of hesped, which we usually translate as eulogy, words of stories of his life and lessons of his life as well. And then we'll make our way to Bnei Israel, to Sons of Israel Cemetery for the kivura, for our burial prayers. We continue with words of comfort, words that come to us from the 144th Psalm. Adonai ma adam v'te'adehu ben enosh v'tichashvehu. Adam lehevel damav, yamav ketzer over. Babokir yatzitz v'chalaf, le'erev yimolel v'yavesh. Tashev enosh ad daka v'tomer. Shuvu b'nei adam, lu chachmu yishchilu zot. Yavinu la'acharitam. Ki lo kemoto yakach hakol. Lo yered acharav kvodo. Shmartam ure'ei yashar. Ki acharit le'ish shalom. Podeh Adonai nefesh avadav. Velo yishmu kol hachosim bo. Adonai, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath. Our days are like a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. You cause us to return to dust, saying, "O return, mortal creatures." Oh, if we were wise, if we understood where we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted, and behold the upright, for they shall have peace. Adonai, you redeem the souls of your servants, and none who trust in you shall be desolate. Of all the Psalms of Nechama, the Psalms of comfort, perhaps the most familiar to all of us are the words of the 23rd Psalm. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, benodeshe yirbitzeini, al mei menuchot, yenahaleini, nafshi yishovev, Yancheni b'maglei tzedek, ינחני במעגלי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא יירא רע, לא יירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי. דשנת בשמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי. ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You've anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in God's house forever. From the 121st Psalm, words that I have to tell you, until I lived here in Colorado Springs, I don't think I fully understood the beginning of this psalm. Because the psalm begins with the words, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. When we make our way to Sons of Israel Cemetery, where we'll be standing as we come to the burial portion of our service, if we lift up our eyes, it will indeed be toward Pikes Peak and the surrounding mountains. It's really an amazing thing to think of the words of this psalm in light of the idea of standing where we are now, that we can really see the beauty of God's creation in the world. It becomes a metaphor for the beauty of our lives as well. Esainai el harim me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai Ose shamayim ve'aretz. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian and God is your protector at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day nor the moon by night. God will guard you from harm. God will guard your soul, your going and your coming, now and forever. These ancient words, going back thousands of years, are words that bring us comfort. But over the centuries and even into modern times, rabbis of various generations have given us words of comfort as well. There is a beautiful poem written in both Hebrew and English that really speaks. It was written about 75 years ago or so by a rabbi on the East Coast. And it talks about the journey of life. And so I share it with you here. Leida hi reshit, uftira tachlit. Birth is a beginning, and death is a destination. But life is a journey, a going and a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the road, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, an aliyah kedusha, a sacred pilgrimage. Leida hi reshit, uftira tachlit. Birth is a beginning, and death is a destination. But life is a journey, an aliyah kedusha, a sacred journey, made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting. In the sacred books of our people, we discuss every issue that there is in life and in death and in everything that comes in between. In the book of Job, Job cries out. He's in great distress and in great sorrow. And he cries out and he says, in a way of trying to understand the things that he has experienced, he says, Adonai natan, Adonai lakach, yehi shem Adonai mevorach. God has given, God has taken, blessed is God's name. We gather here today to honor a life that God has given, that entered into this corporeal world on October 30th, 1941, that brought gifts to family, to friends, and clients, a lot of whom became friends. We also say, Adonai lakach, God has taken away. And we ask many questions. Why now? Some people think 80 is old, 80 is young. Why in this way with this disease? That's a horrible disease that no one should suffer from. And we ask why a lot. And so I'm going to give you to the answer to all of those why questions right now. I don't know. I don't know the answer to the why questions because the why questions are questions that I believe we can never know the answers for those questions. But we can know the answers to other questions. How? How did Jack Dashosh make your life better because he was a part of it? I know you're all thinking of the answer to that question right now because you all know the answer. What? What did Jack Dashosh do to make the world a better place? I only need to wait 5 seconds because you already have answers in 5 seconds to that question. When? This one's a little tougher. Here's your question. When am I going to take those lessons and follow Jack's example and bring those things into the world? You might have to think a couple more minutes on that one, but I know that you'll come up with that answer also. So these are the questions we should ask. And when we find those answers, we, like Job, can say the third part of his little crying out. Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. May God's name be blessed. And this is how we honor a soul and accompany that soul on its journey. There's a book. Okay, so it's like 37 volumes now, so it's not exactly a book. It's called Torat Menachem. I think there might be some people in the room who might have read a couple pages of Torat Menachem. It's the collected teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, of Rabbi Schneerson, the most recent Lubavitcher Rebbe. I think it's up to 37 volumes now. It might be up to 39, I'm not sure. But in the second volume, there's this wonderful collection that are called Igrot Kodesh. It means holy letters. Not like letters like ABC or Aleph, Bet, Gimel, but like you write a person a letter and stick it in the mail. And it's a collection, this particular little section, it's a collection of letters that the Rebbe wrote to people who were in mourning. And there's some beautiful lessons that in these letters that are collected and put into this collection. I just want to share a couple of them with you. The first is this, and Pat, this is especially for you. He writes this. He was actually writing to a widow of a man who was killed in a war. But he writes this. He says, the ties between two people, and certainly those between a husband and a wife, and between parents and children, are chiefly of a spiritual and not a material nature. That means that a disease can affect the body, but it can never affect the spirit or the soul. The physical bond between two persons can be broken, but the spiritual bond can never be broken. He also writes this, and these words I direct to all of us, but especially to Jack's 3 children. The Rebbe also writes in the same collection. This was a letter that he wrote to a teenager whose mother had died very, very young. And the Rebbe wrote these words: the bond between the living and the soul who has ascended endures. For the soul is enduring and eternal, and sees and observes what is taking place with those connected with him and close to him. Every good deed they do causes his spirit to find pleasure. Specifically, the accomplishments that he has taught to his children and raised his children with, that will bring about good deeds. This is to say, he has a part in the deeds that result from the education that he provided to his children and to those whom he influenced. Beautiful words of how we are influenced and how we hold dear and remember a soul. As we mentioned, Jack was born on October 30th, 1941, and left this world this past Thursday evening. He left a legacy of goodness and kindness and love. He left a legacy of taking care of others, not just the others that were closest to him, his wife and his children and his grandchildren, but those who began by walking in the door and saying, I need a lawyer, can I hire you? And provided for them love and kindness and goodness. Through 80 plus years of life and through 53, I got to get the number right, Pat, 53 years, 5 months, and 5 days. I got it? Okay, good. 53 years, 5 months, and 5 days of marriage provided those beautiful gifts as well. It's impossible to tell the entire story of Jack's life as we sit here at Temple Shalom for A couple of minutes really is how long we're here. But we can begin to tell those stories, and we can continue to share those stories. And if I let Pat talk, it'll be 7 hours worth of stories. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I need to introduce you to Pat. Yesterday, I was at the house with the family, and we told some stories. Pat told a couple of stories. I showed up at 2. I left at 7, because Pat had a couple of stories to share. And every one of them was delightful and amazing and beautiful and uplifting and all of those other things. I could add 20 more words into that. But we'll begin to tell some stories today. We're going to hear from some family representatives, a child-in-law, and a grandchild. And as we hear these words, I hope that as you hear the stories that they are sharing with us, I hope that in your own hearts and your own souls that you'll find the stories that you have of Jack. Some of you who've known Jack for a short period of time, and some of you who've known him for decades upon decades. And so we begin to tell the stories today. And as we go on through the rest of the day and the rest of the week and the rest of the month and beyond, we'll continue to tell those stories and to learn the lessons of how to be, well, I guess it depends on which dictionary you look in. If you want a Hebrew dictionary, the word we would use would be tzaddik. If you want a Yiddish dictionary, the word we would find in there would be mensch. And if you use a dictionary of English, you would say an all-around nice guy. I know that's not a word, but maybe that's in the dictionary too, and it's a good description anyway. And so we want to begin by telling the story of Jack, by inviting his daughter Dvorah to come and share some words with us.
Okay, I'm using a tablet for the first time, so. Okay, you can hear me? Ooh, okay. Okay. My father, whose name is Yaakov ben Moshe Halevi, my father was born in the Lower East Side of Manhattan to Moshe and Simcha Dashash. He was the 5th child of his father and the 6th child of his mother, the youngest. My father always spoke of his mother positively and said he always felt loved by her. My grandmother's family all lived in Israel. And when my father was 9 years old, she took only him on the long journey by boat to visit her family. My father's father, Moshe, came to the land of Israel around the turn of the century when he was about 2 years old, when his family made the journey walking from Yemen through the Arabian Peninsula to Israel. Wasn't called Israel then. They married and later settled in New York, where the 4 youngest children were born. I remember as a young girl going to synagogue with my father. Then, when we were a little older, we attended Hebrew school. On Shabbos was Hebrew school's junior congregation, and when we went to junior congregation, my father went upstairs to shul, and we would meet him afterwards. He really enjoyed going to shul. On the way home, he would sing how he loves his wife and children to the tune of Adon Olam. I went to college, and there I became Jewishly involved. After college, I went to Israel to do kibbutz ulpan and to learn Hebrew. I was seriously thinking of living there permanently. Then I suddenly became observant. It wasn't so sudden for me because it was what I was looking for, and I had been Jewishly involved in one way or another for many years. So one day I called my mother and told her, I left the kibbutz, I'm at a yeshiva for girls in the north, and oh, by the way, I gave all my pants away to our cousin, I only keep kosher on Shabbos, and I don't shake men's hands. Just thought I should let you know. Needless to say that my mother freaked out. It didn't help that her rabbi said that I was in a cult. But my father was calm. He never said anything negative about it, at least not to me. I don't know what he said to you guys. And here's probably why. My father went to MTJ, which is called Mesivta Tiferet Jerusalem, a well-known yeshiva on the Lower East Side. A yeshiva whose Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the school at the time, was Rav Moshe Feinstein, one of the great Torah leaders of the generation, who was then followed by his son, known as Rav David, who was my father's Rebbe, his teacher. My father went to yeshiva until he was 16 years old. He also attributed his time at yeshiva to him wanting to and becoming a lawyer. You could always have a logical discussion with my father. He was honest, and he didn't do any shtick. I remember that the cable guy was impressed that we actually paid for every cable box in the house, and we had a lot. When I came home as this religious skirt-wearing girl who previously only wore leggings and large men's shirts, he took me on a tour of the Lower East Side. He took me to a Jewish bookstore, and then he let me buy a lot of Jewish books, I think all of which I still have today, books that I really have used over the years. Before I came back from Israel, he went out and bought me plates, cutlery, pots, and pans. Before my wedding, we got a lot of things that needed to be toiveled, which means immersed in a body of water before use. He took me to Shungam Lake, our local community lake where people would go swimming. And it was before or after hours, and we dunked everything in the lake there. When someone, maybe it was a lifeguard or a security guard, came over and asked, "Are you washing dishes?" He just said yes, and they just walked away. As a newly observant woman, I started to read the Torah portion of the week each week to myself in English. I remember being very excited about some of the things I read. Wow, it really says it here in the Torah, in the Bible. I was especially excited when I would read anything about the Levi'im. I would call my father and say, "Do you know what it says about Levi'im?" I would tell him all the things I was learning for the first time. Levi'im were not enslaved during the slavery in Egypt. They were counted differently from the rest of the Israelites, and they had a special service in the Beis HaMikdash, the temple service. I was so excited to share that with him and so proud of our heritage that my father was a Levi. Actually, my boys told me just today that they were reading the Daily Tanya, which is a century-old book written by the Shneur Zalman of La'adi, right, boys? Yes. That describes in detail how a Levi is on a higher spiritual level. Then, after a few years of doing different things in Maryland, I moved back home. I wasn't sure what I would be doing. My parents, to both of their credit, fixed up my childhood bedroom very nicely, and I got a job, not such a great job, but a job. Then I had an opportunity to go to Crown Heights for a short time to learn. Things fell into place, and I was going to live with an elderly woman in her home and learn at a local girls' yeshiva. My parents both came to move me in. It was a nice brownstone, but my mother was freaking out in her own way. My father told her after they left, "You know what, let's go to Borough Park, the old neighborhood where they both grew up, to get something to eat." So they did. While they were there, they saw a young Hasidish woman with a short wig and a pillbox hat, probably dressed in a blue suit, pushing a baby carriage. And my father says to my mother, "Look, it isn't so bad, this life your daughter wants to live," calming her down another time. That was my dad, usually calm, the voice of reason in the house. You could always have a logical conversation with him, which I appreciated. I minored in justice in college, and when discussing Jewish law with my children, I am almost always right about a ruling and what it's going to be. I'm almost always right. And this is definitely an influence from my father. As my sister and brother can attest, our father would take every opportunity to see us. He drove me to college and helped me get set up there, and also at the apartments that I later lived in. When Hannah was born, he was the first one there. Hannah was born on Sukkot, and she was early, so no one was really expecting her yet. So after the holiday, my father was the first one I called, and it was before caller ID, so it was really a surprise. Now you see who's calling, where they're calling from the hospital, but then I called, they said, "Hi, I just had a baby girl." And he was like, "What? Mazel tov." And I didn't think he was going to come that night. He's like, "I'm coming right now." And I was like, the hospital's going to let him in, but they did. He came, even though it was late. It was like 10 o'clock. He had a hard time getting into the hospital, though, because he was asking for Deborah Dashash instead of Rosenzweig. He was like, "No, she called me. I know she's here." And then he's like, "Yeah, Rosenzweig." He came to stay with us for Shabbos once when my mother was out of town with her girlfriends. He took a car service when he didn't feel comfortable driving to Crown Heights for Dina Leah's bas mitzvah, and had a worker drive him to Aaron Moshe's bar mitzvah. So, where are we now today? Do I still have a father? Judaism teaches, like the rabbi mentioned, Judaism teaches that our life in this world is a meshing of the physical and spiritual. When the body can no longer house the soul, the body goes back to the ground, the physicality that it is, and the soul returns to its maker to do whatever it is that a soul does. A soul doesn't die, and we always have a father. How do you relate to a father who's no longer in a physical body? There's a story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe that explains. It's a true story. Once a man was waiting to speak to Lubavitcher Rebbe one evening. The man looked like a wealthy man, not someone that usually came around, and looked very distraught. It was noticed that when he came out of the Rebbe's room, he looked lighter, like a weight was taken off of him. A young man noticed this and asks the man, "What happened? Your mood seems to have changed." He says that he had recently lost his only son, and that he and his wife feel so distraught that all their money and success seem worthless, and they just don't know how to proceed. The Rebbe said to them, "What if it were the case that your son was on a faraway island, and he was doing well, but that he couldn't correspond with you? However, you can send him packages that he can receive." And the man said, "Yes, I would miss him, but I would be happy that all is well with him." The Rebbe told him that is exactly the case. Your son is in a good place, all is well with him, and you can send him gifts. Those gifts aren't physical gifts, but spiritual gifts. Some ways we give to someone who is no longer in this world is to learn Torah in their name, to do acts of goodness and kindness in their name, to give charity in their name, or any other mitzvah that can be done in their name. Thank you for being our Father in this world. And now you will have to be our Father in the next world. We will do our best to send you gifts.
Thank you, Devorah, for sharing with us. We want to invite David to come up. So we'll hear from a son-in-law as well to share a little bit about Jack as well.
I was doing pretty well till the middle of that, so bear with me if I can try to keep it together and think about Jack for just a moment. Oh, I'm a little taller than the rest. The whole time I was with Jack and Pat in the last 15 months, I always had the urge to write a book, Time with Jack. It was an amazing time for me because I was able to see him when he was lucid and talking about things that he really felt. And the times as we got closer to here were fewer and far between. But I'd just like to share a little bit about how I felt about it. As was mentioned, Jack's story began in a tenement in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in New York City. His family worked hard, moved to a better place. Jack completed his education and continued on being awarded a degree as a doctor of jurisprudence in New York University. Jack was the kind of lawyer that everyone wanted, and the hopes to find when they need one. Not only was he well versed in the law, but his true genius showed when he was always able to maintain a calm, thoughtful approach to finding solutions. The magic of Jack was how he always focused on doing the right thing simply because it was the right thing to do. His dedication to follow his moral compass was enriched throughout his life dedicated to God. I personally respected his daily commitment to prayer, and I was fortunate to watch his undying devotion to his family, whom he welcomed me into 28 years ago. To say Jack and I grew up in different worlds is an understatement. Jack, the calm, thoughtful New Jersey lawyer, and me, well, I was a strange Colorado cowboy that fell in love with his daughter and learned to love the whole family. I will always cherish the memory of the first time Pat and Jack ever experienced high altitude here. The sight of Pat and Jack standing on the side of Loveland Pass at 12,000 feet, leaning into the hill to make sure they didn't fall over, was an amazing vision I'll never stop seeing. But alas, I do need to confess to Jack, I was in fact out of gas when we drove down the mountain. Thank goodness it was all downhill from Chief Hosa to Golden where we pulled in and got gas. Jack and I were able to get to know each other a lot more in the last 15 months of working with him and Pat as a part of their courageous battle against Parkinson's. Jack talked a lot about how he could not believe the support and the friendship that came from this community, including Jack in the poker nights, the guys, the canasta, people standing up to help Pat, the canasta games and the friends made at the Y and the exercise group, they all meant so very much to him. He often stressed about, or told me about how he couldn't believe it, that these people he just met turned out to be such true friends. And I thank you from Jack for all of that. Rabbi Sherwood, thank you for providing unwavering support and guidance to the family, everything from prayer to tree removal. So you've worn a lot of hats this week. It is appreciated. Jack and I talked about how neither one of us would ever have predicted the two of us ending up here in Colorado Springs together. We agreed this situation was terrible. We also agreed that he had a lot to be proud of. You took your Kleenexes with you. Okay. We also agreed that the reason he lived and prayed daily in the presence of God was so that when this time came, it would be okay. And thank God it is okay. Thanks for making so many of our lives better. And don't worry, Jack. Pat will be okay, I promise. Thank you.
In his life, Jack was blessed with grandchildren. I would take a poll to see in the room how many of you are blessed with 1 or 2 or 3. But Jack was blessed with 13 grandchildren, one Zichronah Livracha, one of blessed memory. And we're going to have one of his grandchildren come and speak with us. We're going to invite Hannah to share some words about her grandfather.
Hi. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Hello. When my grandparents still lived on the East Coast, every so often they would come visit us on Sunday mornings. Grandma would come in holding her Dunkin' Donuts coffee, and Grandpa with bagels from the local bagel store. Grandma would give a hug and a kiss to each grandkid, and Grandpa would too. I would go in for my hug and kiss with Grandma, which was always uneventful, but would then have to brace myself for Grandpa's kiss and would wince every time from Grandpa's beard scratching my cheek or forehead. Grandpa would always make sure to pick out the French toast bagels, a cinnamon raisin bagel dusted in powdered sugar, a Sunday special. Those were always our favorite. We'd eat brunch, and then sometimes, as noon approached, Grandpa would take the grandkids for dessert and we'd go for ice cream on the avenue. Grandpa always had a corny joke or a funny comment to share. His laugh was loud and infectious, and he'd make us smile. Grandpa was someone who just had what we'd call a good vibe. He radiated happiness, joy, and love of life, although the last several years it may not have been as obvious. I know inside he was still the same grandpa with the same inner joy. Summers, we'd always come to visit for a couple of days at my grandparents' home in New Jersey. We'd go to the yacht club where we'd go swimming and eat Italian ices, or we'd go for a nature walk at the local park, visit the zoo, or go shoe shopping. We'd often come back, have dinner, and finish off with an ice cream bar and Disney Channel. Once my grandparents had moved to Colorado, we'd keep in touch with phone calls, and some of us were even lucky enough to visit. Most recently, my brother Mordechai and I came to visit in February. Grandpa shared some family stories and his experiences as a lawyer with us. It was an emotional experience for Mordechai and me, and we're very thankful that we had that opportunity to visit. With the advent of Zoom, we began weekly Zoom meetings with Grandma and Grandpa and the Rosenzweig grandkids, where we would share updates of our lives and hear about the temperamental regional weather and Grandma and Grandpa's wonderful family and new friends from Colorado. Grandpa was always grateful for the people in his life. About 6 years ago, when my brother Aaron had his bar mitzvah celebration, Grandma had recently had surgery and was unable to attend. That didn't stop Grandpa. He made every effort to come and celebrated Aaron's bar mitzvah with us. Grandpa put effort into his relationships. He didn't look for excuses, and he was able to create some beautiful memories. We love you, Grandpa, and we'll miss you always.
Thank you, Dvorah and David and Hannah, for sharing with us. I think we need to make a note, since we all know that we were going to be here at 10 o'clock this morning, and we're here this afternoon, that snow things are important in the Dashosh family. I don't know if it's important, but they happen. Right? We learned in the last few days, or I learned, that Jack and Pat were married in a blizzard, that Jack opened up his new office in an ice storm, and so of course Jack would leave us in a late May snowstorm that would delay the funeral by a few hours. We thought originally it was going to be a few days, but the wonderful people who work with us through Evergreen Cemetery at the city were able to make things work so that we could actually be here today. And so, is there something about snow? Is there something about ice? Is there something about heavy snow that comes this weekend and knock down all kinds of trees and things? Is there a theme running through this? It's certainly not that Jack was a cold-hearted person, because he was exactly the opposite of this. But those are the kind of things, getting married in a blizzard, an ice storm when you're opening your office, a snowstorm that knocks down trees in the cemetery to make it so that we may not be able to actually bury Jack in the cemetery. When you get to the cemetery later, you'll take a look around. There's a lot of damage. So why all of these things, of these destructions of nature? It's because Jack's nature was the exact opposite. It was the picture of calm. When you walked in a room that Jack was in, you could feel the calm in the room. And this trait is certainly a great trait for someone who's going to be your attorney. It's a great trait for being a father to children who sometimes got themselves in trouble. I promise I won't say any of the stories that you all shared yesterday. But this calmness is something that's important, because in order to do some of the other things that we must do to be a mensch, to be a tzaddik, to be a righteous, good person, we need to be a calm person to do that. A couple of stories were shared yesterday, one in a diner and one in a bank. In the diner, the waitress gave back change, $20 or $30 too much in change. And at the bank, the teller gave Jack $500 too much when he was taking money out of the bank. In both cases, he turned the car around and gave the change back, including for the bank. As Pat was telling us, the bank was closed, and he banged on the window of the bank because the tellers were inside counting everything. And he banged on the window. They must have thought, who's this crazy person banging on the window of our bank? But they finally came over, and he said they were inside trying to figure out what happened to the missing $500. And he was standing there at the window banging on the door so that he could solve their problem of the missing $500. There's a calmness in being able to bring to your head that, what do you do with this? Are you an honest person who returns the money, or are you not? There's a calmness in being able to say, as happened one time in one of the stories we talked about yesterday, Your Honor, I know we're in the middle of a court proceeding right now, but I need to leave now because my daughters need me. I don't know about you, but I would not be calm if I was the lawyer saying that to the judge while I was arguing before the judge. But this calmness that Jack had gave him the strength to be that tzaddik, to be that righteous person, to be the person who helped break the blue laws in, how many states was it? Between 3 and 5 states. He was the lawyer who went and argued before the New Jersey Supreme Court in 1977 to break the blue laws in New Jersey and in a few other states as well. It's that calmness that Jack can be Jack, whether he was with the teller at the bank or whether he was introducing his wife to this interesting judge at an event that they were at. His name was William Rehnquist, Supreme Court Justice. But Supreme Court Justice, teller at the bank, the calmness of Jack was there. Through meals together at the Quiet Man, the Irish pub, where I understand he found a lot of his clients. Did he ever do any drunk driving things for any of those clients? I figured he did, because it was in an Irish pub, right? But Jack was there. There's a period at the end of that sentence. Jack was there. When his wife and his children did community theater, he was there. When his kids graduated or had other major events in their life, he was there. For his grandchildren too, he was there. And for his friends and his clients, he was there. And being there not just physically, but being there with all of the force of his knowledge that he learned in law school to make the world a better place, not only through law, but perhaps more importantly, as I have learned, Pat, it's your fault that my scale is higher than it was a week ago, through ice cream. Now, I've learned that vanilla ice cream is the best because Homer can eat vanilla ice cream. If you haven't met Homer, he's about this big. Yeah. And dogs can't eat the chocolate, so the vanilla is good. But you heard Hannah mention ice cream. Pat, how many gallons of ice cream are in the freezer? Not as many, because you fed so much to me and Lisa when we've been over there. We've eaten gallons of ice cream. But there's something too. Ice cream, snow, ice storms. It's all of those cold things that we bring into us, but also bring us into that moment of calm. So where do we go from here? We learn from Jack's life that we should be there. It's a simple lesson. It's a simple lesson to say, but it's not such a simple lesson to do. We should be there. Should be there for our families, to teach our children and our grandchildren, to make special moments for each one of them, so that we might make memories that make us smile, not just through vanilla ice cream, but maybe Tutti Frutti ice cream. Ask Pat, she'll tell you the story later. But to create moments for each of our children and our grandchildren, to take care of other people, whether they are people that we know well in our family, or they're the client who knocks on the door and needs help in whatever it is that we do in our professional lives. And we don't always have to get financial profit from it. Jack did, could we even count the number of pro bono cases that he did over the years? A ridiculously high number. Why? Because people needed help, and Jack brought calm and goodness to their life by providing that help. So as we leave this place today, it's important for each and every one of us to be there for the people around us. And when you are, I give you this challenge. We read in the Talmud, on almost every single page of the Talmud, Rabbi so-and-so said in the name of Rabbi so-and-so, who said in the name of Rabbi so-and-so. Why this in the name of, in the name of? Because they're teaching a lesson in the name of their teacher. Because they don't get the full credit for the lesson, because someone else taught it to them. And so when you are there and present and helping another person, tell them I'm doing this because Jack taught me to do that. When you make a special moment for your children or your grandchildren, you can say, I'm doing that because I learned from Jack that that's the right thing to do. And when you can be as all of us have the opportunity to be, the calm in the storm. You can tell the people that I found the way to be the calm in the storm from my grandpa, from my father, from my husband, from my friend, from my lawyer, from the guy who hung out at Canasta. Jack taught me. And if we take those lessons of Jack's life and we live them in our world and make them not just a story we tell, because we have plenty of stories, but we also take those things and make them a reality in our lives and live those stories and live those lessons. In that way, we not only keep his memory alive, but we also honor his soul. As we read from the Lubavitcher Rebbe at the very beginning, right? When we do mitzvot, when we do good things in the world, we send a gift to his soul on its journey, on its way to the world to come, and in its existence there. May the lessons of his life always bring lessons and blessings to our lives. We have a concept called Kriya. Kriya means tear. These words that they just said, praise are you, our God, ruler of the universe, the one true judge. The idea of kriya, of tearing, for some we tear a ribbon, for some we tear our clothing. The idea of kriya is this: when we mourn, our hearts are torn. And sometimes we cry, and sometimes we laugh. Why do we laugh? Because we have wonderful stories that make us laugh, and that's important. And when we laugh, or in those moments when we don't cry, our heart is still torn. And so we tear our clothing or tear our ribbon so that those who can't see inside our eyes and see our torn heart in this moment that we don't have tears, they can see the torn nature of our heart so that we can provide comfort for those. Somewhere along the line, there was a guy who said, time heals all wounds. I don't know who that guy was, but he was not very smart. Because time does not heal all wounds. What time does, time gives us the opportunity to figure out how we will live with that hole in our heart. Time gives us the opportunity to find the spiritual band-aid that goes on that hole in our heart. Because if that hole seals up, the memory of that soul is gone. And so we don't want that hole to seal up. We just want to figure out how to hold on to our lives where we put our own spiritual band-aid on that hole. And we learn how to live with that little wound. And the tearing of the kriya ribbon, the tearing of our clothing, gives us a reminder of that as well. That we will figure out how to make our way with that tear in our own universe and in our soul as well. In a moment, we will bring our chapel part of our service to a close. When we finish, we will make our way to Sons of Israel Cemetery. If you need directions, Our wonderful people from Feldman's Mortuary have, I believe they still have a few more I know a lot of you don't need directions. For those that do, there's written directions to get to the cemetery. As we do, you must go in on the Sons of Israel Road. For those of you who know that you can go in through the other roads through Evergreen Cemetery, you cannot. Evergreen Cemetery's gates are locked shut because there's still a lot of work to do to make the roads passable for people who are going there. So when you go to the cemetery, make sure as soon as you get there, you turn immediately to the right once you're at the cemetery entrance into the road that goes around to Sons of Israel Cemetery. And we will conclude our service there. Additionally, I want to remind all of you that there will be a Shiva Minyan at the Dashash home this evening and tomorrow evening at 7 p.m., and your presence would be welcomed at those services as well. As we bring our service here to a close, I'll ask you all to rise as we say the words of our memorial prayer, the El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamitzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim Utorim, Kzohar Arakia Mazirim, Et Nishmat Yaakov ben Moshe Levi, Shelach le'olamo, Ba'al Rachamim, Yasdirehu b'seter knefav le'olamim, V'yitzuro b'yitzur ha'chaim, Et Nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Yaakov ben Moshe Halevi, to Jack Dashash, who has entered his eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us together say, Amen. Please be seated. In a moment, we will be bringing the casket back to the funeral coach so we can make our way to Sons of Israel Cemetery. As we do, in just a moment, we'll have you all rise. But please stay in your place until Jack and his family have been able to make their way out. And again, we'll see you at Sons of Israel Cemetery in just a short while. And again, a reminder of Shiva Minyan this evening at 7 o'clock and tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock as well. On behalf of Pat and the rest of the extended Dashash family, thank you to all of you who are here today, and we'll see you in just a few short minutes over at Sons of Israel Cemetery. Thank you.